Okay, so this talk is called Themes in Omani Folktales. I'm going to tell you about Omani Folktales. There are some new books out recently, somewhat recently, of Omani folktales in English translation. So I don't know how many of you know much about Oman. If you don't, that's okay. It's a country in the Arab Gulf. It is close to Saudi Arabia. And when I traveled to Oman, I was there in 2008, 2009, working as assistant professor at a new university called Dhofar University in a region in Oman called Dhofar, in a city called Salalah, which is near Yemen. Just so you guys know. Okay, so I've begun to do this study of Omani folktales. I developed the interest when I was in Oman. Usually folktales are not my specialty. I usually focus on things like social movements and social identity and these kinds of things. But being there, I became interested in their folktales, and so I had the unique opportunity to learn about the folktales and learn about the new books that were coming out, but to also be there. It's a fascinating place, beautiful place. I miss it. I miss the camels. Camels are a big part of Omani culture. But based on my recent examination of their folktales that I do have translated to English, I do not speak or read Arabic except for a few things. And but according to my examination, there are three major thematic facets that you can find in the folktales. One is the environment, okay? The next is both justice and injustice, okay, that dichotomy. And then yet another dichotomy of the focus, a shifting focus from what is domestic or national to what is international. Okay, so believe it or not, Oman's a pretty international country. They have many Indian immigrants there, immigrants from India who come over to labor and or just live. The area of the country where I was has during the summer, or actually the summer in Oman is not our summer, but during their warm season, many Swedish tourists. So believe it or not, many Swedes go to Oman, okay? And Saudis might visit. When I was in the country, an Iraqi came into my office one day, and interestingly enough, many visitors from Yemen might come. And when I was in Salalah, there was what people were calling a war, rebellion, or revolution in Yemen. And one day, some of the rebels came to the university, completely peaceful, but they were there. And also, there was a history of Portuguese occupation in Oman, and to this day, the Portuguese and the Omanis do not get along. So it's a bit of a diplomatic issue. And in the region where I was, there was also a German university and many English people. So the Omanis have really great diplomatic relations with the UK, and that's part of their international culture. Okay, so let me tell you what I mean by the environment. In the folk tales, you often get a reference or receive a reference about camels or camel snakes, birds, including a raven in particular, goats, hyenas, donkeys, foxes, and leopards, okay? And the animals are usually portrayed as part of the environment or part of the landscape. So sometimes there might be a character, an anthropomorphized animal character, an animal that is imbued with human characteristics, who becomes a main character. So for example, there is a tale about a raven who is personified or anthropomorphized. But usually that's not the case in Omani folktales. They're usually part of the landscape. Okay, so unlike tales from the country of India, where the animal is more likely to be anthropomorphized, the Omani animals are usually part of the landscape. And that's really the feel that I got about camels when I was there, is that they're sort of, always around you and kind of blending in with the sand in the background. So the animals seem to behave as they're expected to behave. Edibles are a big part of the Omani environment in folk tales and in real life. So the spice thyme is important. Ghee, which is a clarified butter that is also something that appears in Indian culture. Dates, which are important. for breaking the fast during Ramadan. Soup. So for example, lentil soup is a big thing in most Arab cultures, including Omani culture. Asida. How many of you know what asida is? Does anyone know what that is here? I'll tell you. Okay. So it is a ghee and flour dumpling. This is what it looks like. I'll pass the book around. This is a book that came out in 2015 about Omani cuisine. It's really interesting. I'll keep it open to the asida. Corn halwa, which is a gelatinous dessert, not to be confused with halva. Halva is made of sesame paste and sugar. Halwa is a gelatinous mixture, usually garnished with nuts and sometimes edible flower petals, and water. Okay, and these, like the animals, can sort of have magical properties that arise. Elements like gold, jewels, and frankincense are big deal in these folk tales, and an important part of Omani life. Okay, so turning to this theme of contrast or dichotomy, if we want to look at the facet of justice and injustice in an Omani folk tale might include kidnapping or killing, trickery, theft, deceit, or people for sale, okay? Justice could include confrontation or imprisonment, being able to return home, a happy ending, intervention through the divine, magic or jinn, or the jinn, which is like many genies or angels. And finally, escape or charity. Okay, and sometimes escape means getting away with something that you've done, that maybe you shouldn't have done, but you haven't hurt anyone, and so you escape. Omani culture is very happy-go-lucky. Okay. Now, with the second contrast or dichotomy, the focus on domestic or national ways of being might include the focus on a mosque, on Islam, an imam, which is an Islamic cleric, or Omani royals. Okay, so Oman is a sultanate, or in other words, a kingdom that is ruled by a sultan and his family. And focus on the foreign might include mentioning an Indian or their religion, Hinduism. Might also focus on an enemy, like the Portuguese, Catholicism, or Fort Irani, which is where the Portuguese used to hold down their military. Or it might mention a Saudi. So usually something Indian or Saudi is only sort of mentioned in passing, but there's often a real focus on the Portuguese as enemies. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I shut my thing off. I pressed the wrong button. I hope I get this back. Maybe, oh, I got it. Okay, thanks. I'm sorry about that. Okay. Okay, also there's this division between the sacred and profane, and this is pretty typical in any culture. So this is a concept that most anthropologists use. It's also used in sociology, and the sociologist that this goes back to is Emile Durkheim. But in Omani folk lore, water is considered sacred, angels or jinn are sacred, mosques are sacred, and camels who carry water are sacred. Camels are very revered in Omani culture. The profane might include death, lies, snakes, and other animal predators like leopards. Okay, so I'm going to read some of the folk tales to you so you know what I'm talking about and you get an example of it. So here's one called The Camels Moved. Hamad was a Sufi, and that is another sect of Islam. Most Omanis are Sunni, but this man Hamad was a Sufi. He was a Muslim mystic, reputed to have great powers. Legend has it that one day he guided a massive rock down the mountain with the aid of a single alfalfa leaf. When the Imam heard the story, he ordered a mosque to be built as a record of the miracle. Hamad was completely devout and spent all his time worshiping alone in the mosque. His father used to worry about his welfare and wondered what he did with his time. One day, he came quietly to the mosque to look inside. He got the surprise of his life. Hamad was reciting the Holy Quran while making a caravan of camels from tree leaves. The caravan of camels was moving around him in a circle, one by one. His father was shocked, but recognizing his son's power and devotion, decided not to spy on him again. Okay, so this encompasses what is national or domestic, and what is sacred, and also encompassing parts of the environment, including the focus on camels and the appearance of an alfalfa leaf. Okay. All right, so now I'll read something that highlights the focus on injustice and what is international. This is called The Kidnapped. Long ago, like all children in his village, Ali used to play freely on the beach next to the sea. But times were changing. When the arrival of the Portuguese and their occupation of the main ports in Oman, the coast was becoming a dangerous place. One day, one of the Portuguese ships sailed up to the shore to get fresh supplies of water. When the ship sailed away, water was not the only thing they had taken. Ali had been kidnapped and was made to work for the enemy. Over the years, Ali learned the art of fighting and became a Portuguese soldier and pirate. And his knowledge of the language and geography of his homeland was an advantage to them in battle. However, Ali was only a child when he was kidnapped, and he really never understood that the Portuguese were harming his own people. But he grew older and began to fully understand the treachery of what he was doing and why it was wrong. He began to resent the Portuguese enemy. He yearned for his own family and village and kept planning how he could return home. The opportunity arose one day when Ali was asked to see what ships he could find and plunder. He loaded his ship with gold coins and an ample supply of water and food and set sail with his assistants. When night fell, Ali waited until the guards were asleep and followed the star known as Ya to reach his village. Whenever one of the sailors got up and asked Ali their whereabouts, he told them to go back to sleep, that all was well. When he reached his home, he took his sword and shield and entered the village. It was night, but soon found his parents home and awakened them. His mother immediately recognized her beloved son. Ali asked for the men of the village to be brought to his house. Then he told them a story and what he planned to do. The men of the village agreed, and shortly before sunrise, they boarded the ship and slaughtered the crew. They took the ship's cargo and divided the gold coins, food, and water among the villagers. Ali became a hero and lived in the village happily ever after. Okay, so he learns how to be ethical through a series of mistakes and correcting them, and finally going home. Okay, and now I'm going to read something that is fairly lengthy. Most of the things I have to read are not this lengthy, but this is an example of how, ironically, sometimes in Omani culture, the justice is to get away with it. Okay, this is called the solid ghee. An old man and his wife wanted to make a dish, a sida, when they realized they didn't have enough ghee because they couldn't afford to buy it. "What do you think we should do now?" the old woman asked her husband. "I don't know," replied the husband. "Didn't you go to the market this morning?" she continued. "Yes," he said, "I went to the market, but I didn't have any money." His wife asked, "Do you remember where the shop is?" "I do, and I'll tell you what we'll do. First, cover yourself with a shawl and hide a small pot under it. I will pretend to hit you with a stick as we enter the souk," that is like the market, the souk, "and you pretend to cry. I will keep on pretending until we get to the shop." "Oh dear, I suppose there is no other way to get the ghee," his wife replied. Just before they went to the souk, the old lady started screaming, "Oh man, you have tortured me and made my life a misery." "Well, you don't obey me, and you don't do anything useful," he shouted. And they entered the souk, still shouting. A crowd began to gather around. "Old man, why are you doing this to her?" they asked. "This old lady is bad to us. She sleeps all day and doesn't do any work." "Then let her go back to her family," they said. "No, she must come back home with me," he responded. "But what if she doesn't want to go home with you?" She must, the old man shouted. When they arrived at the shop, the old woman sat on the entrance and started to cry and howling louder. "This man has made my life a misery," she told the shopkeeper. "Please help me. Aren't you ashamed of yourself, old man, beating your wife at your age? She is the mother of your children. Why are you doing this to her? The old man responded angrily, don't interfere. She wouldn't obey my orders, and she's not a nice woman anymore. The shopkeeper told the old lady to go and sit in the shop while he talked with her husband and tried to calm him down. She entered the shop, closed the door, and looked at the ghee. Outside, her husband was shouting at the shopkeeper, tell her to come out and come home with me. She will not come out unless she wants to. Meanwhile, the old lady had found the ghee, but it was solid and wouldn't pour into her pot. She shouted to her husband, you be quiet out there. He quickly yelled back, oh, I'm the son of the solid ghee, am I? Then I'll have to use my stick again. She understood this message and took a stick from the shop and stirred the ghee until it was soft and she could fill her pot. The old man allowed the shopkeeper to calm him, and the shopkeeper called the old lady to come outside and be reunited with her husband. Go home together, he will not harm you if you do as he says, he told the wife. If you hit her, she will complain to the judge, he told the husband. No, I won't do that, replied the husband. Let's go home, wife. They left, and as she took the ghee out from under her shawl, he said, it's good you shouted that message to me from the shop, otherwise we couldn't make a sita. When I found the ghee solid, I didn't know what to do. I'm glad you took, I'm glad you told me to use a stick. Now we can eat. They made the asita, ate it, and were happy. When the shopkeeper opened the next day and a customer came for the ghee, he realized that it had been stolen. Who has taken the ghee, he screamed. Maybe there's a hole in the dish and it's stripped away, said the customer. No, look, there isn't a hole. Who has stolen my ghee, he shouted. A crowd gathered. Did you sell any yesterday? Did anyone visit your shop, they questioned. No, I didn't sell any yesterday, and no one came to the shop except the old couple. She came inside when I calmed her husband down. Then it must have been them. Don't you know them? Would you recognize them again? Came from the crowd. Only if I see them, said the unhappy shopkeeper. Well, they certainly played a trick on you. They came, took the ghee, and disappeared. For 3 days, everyone searched for the couple, but no success. Okay. All right. Okay, so I mentioned that water can be considered divine or sacred, and for that I do have something that's a little bit shorter. This is called the water diviner. Once upon a time there was a man called al-Sharqi, renowned throughout Oman for tracking sources of underground water and discovering the right places to dig wells. One day, the Imam called him and demanded to know the secret. He replied by saying, if anyone else has asked me, I wouldn't tell them, but I cannot hide anything from you now that you've asked me. When I was young, I used to go hunting. I would spend 2 to 4 days in the mountains, plains, and wadis. One day I saw an old man sleeping under the shade of a tree. He looked tired and ill. He woke up and asked me, in a faint voice, to approach him, give me some water dates. I feel ill and unable to move. So I asked him for water and dates, and he drank and ate. Then I asked him to pass by and bring him food and water. I returned to the old man and brought him food and the water. On the 3rd day, he felt better and said, you have done me a great favor and I want to repay you. Look, you look tired and poor. How are you going to repay me? I think you have better come to my village where you will be my guest until you feel better. He asked me to come closer, and when I did, he put some coal on my eyelids. When I opened my eyes, I began to see what lies underground, minerals, water, and so on. I described what I saw, so he asked me to come closer. He then put coal on my eyelids again. When I opened my eyes, my sight was sharp, slightly less than it had been. He put the coal on for a 3rd time, and this time I saw the only water underground. When I told the old man, he said, this will do you good, and people will also benefit from it. The things you saw before are of no use to either you or us. From that day on, I've been helping people bring their villages and farms to life again. Okay, so water brings the miraculous. On the other hand, Snakes and death are profane in Omani folklore. Okay. So this is one of the relatively new books that are out. This is called Halima and the Snake. This was, I think, published by the British, and it's presented like a children's book. So there's actually a folk tale called Halima and the Snake, and this is, I'll read you a part of it. "Oh Halima, I am your snake, and this is not a cave. Indeed, it is my home. Come in and see for yourself." He took her hand and let her in. As her eyes got used to the darkness, they grew wider and wider with wonder. The walls were covered with lush carpets, and her feet sunk in the softest sheepskin. Female servants appeared and took her away. They removed her rags and bathed her with scented oils. They scrubbed her skin until it glowed. They drew lacy patterns of henna on her hands and feet. Finally, they dressed her in golden silk and adorned her with jewels. Halima and the snake got married that night. "My lovely wife, go to the mouth of the cave and scream until your stepmother hears you," her husband said. Halima was so happy that she let loose all ear-splitting yell. "Maybe it be so the snake has bitten the girl," the stepmother rejoiced. At sunrise, the stepmother hurried to the cave to see for herself. "But what's this?" There was no cave, but a grand palace, and there was Halima looking like the sultan's wife. Halima explained that the snake was no ordinary snake, but a rich, young, and handsome man. The stepmother wanted the same for her own daughter, and so she went about looking for a snake. One day she saw one that was about to enter a cave. It was fatter and meaner than Halima's snake. She hurried home and pulled her sleeping daughter off the bed. "Come quickly, my daughter. Tonight you will marry a snake, and tomorrow you will live like a queen." The girl trembled with fear and disgust, but her mother said, "Trust me, by Allah, it is only a man disguised as a snake." So in the evening, she dressed her daughter in fine clothes and left her at the cave. "Let's go inside and marry the snake. I will visit you in the morning." The stepmother went home and heard her daughter scream. "But she must be crying from happiness," she smiled to herself. At daybreak, the stepmother went to check on her daughter. She found the cave as it was, dingy and dark, and inside her daughter lying lifeless in a nest of vipers. Okay, so she was killed. Okay, so yet another sociological concept I use to analyze the folk tales is something from the work of German sociologist Zimmel. And he suggests that in culture there is what he would label social statics, or that which does not change, sort of like constants if we were talking about math, and then the variables, or what he would call social dynamics. In Omani culture and the folklore, the statics include the edibles, the things that we eat and drink, the animals that are part of our social life, and the elements, including frankincense and gold and jewels. And the dynamics in culture and the folklore would include childbirth, war, and travel. Okay, so I think what I have here is something about travel. This is called the Brief Imam. Imam Warith hailed from Al-Hajar, and tales abound about him and his quest for justice and equality. One day he heard a voice commanding him to go to Nizwa, which was ruled by a tyrant, and restore justice in the town. So he and his brother traveled there. He bravely defeated the tyrant in battle and was elected imam by the religious leaders of Nizwa in 801 AD. He was as brave in his death as he was in his rule. As Imam, Warith had imprisoned a group of petty criminals in a small cell in the middle of Wadi Kalbu. One day, heavy torrential rain began to fall. As the wadi flooded, the imam and his guards rushed to rescue the prisoners. They were too late. The waters had swept away, and destroyed the prison. The current in the wadi was so strong that imam and his guards were drowned in the rescue attempt along with the prisoners. Okay, so that was not a normal day. Okay. And there's also sort of a kind of play in the folk tales between illusion and reality, which is not always really clear. So ultimately there's a boundary, but the boundary is not always present or evident. So this illusion might include fantasy or delusion, like Halima's delusion that the snake is really going to become a husband. It might include acting, like pretending that you're beating your spouse so you can steal some ghee, or pretension. Okay, so I've got another tale about something else that an Omani might play, from a tale called Miriam Secret. She took as many clothes as she could carry, but wore the most ragged and faded ones. She rubbed black paint all over her face and body. Finally, she packed some dates, flatbread, and water, and quietly closed the door behind her. Miriam walked and walked through many villages. She lost track of their names. At the edge of the desert, she finally stopped. No one here knows my face, she thought. Miriam went to see the sheik of the village to ask for his protection. On seeing the little girl in such a miserable state, the headman took pity on her and let her live in his house as a servant. Miriam worked hard and was treated well, thus she lived for many, many years. But Miriam grew tired of looking dirty and poor all the time. One night, making sure that everyone was fast asleep, she went to the well where the village women did their laundry. She scrubbed herself clean and put on beautiful clothes she had been keeping for so long. Feeling happy at last, she sat by the well, singing one of the lullabies her mother had taught her. Okay? So Miriam wasn't a person who grew up as a servant, but she decided to dress like one and become one temporarily. Okay, so this, despite the instrumental use of acting and pretend and the existence of fantasy or there being delusion, in Omani folk tales, even though what is real isn't always evident, the actual reality can have a consequence. Okay, so there is truth, and there are also everyday limitations, even though miracles happen. Okay. So, what I've got for you is this one, called the Bedouin Knight. Once upon a time, there lived a Bedouin Knight called Salewa, who was known for his bravery and fighting skills. One day he fought a man from another tribe and killed him. So the tribe, renowned for their strength and might, threatened to avenge the dead man by killing him. However, they had to wait for the right opportunity as they were frightened of him. Days and months passed by. His land became arid, and his tribe's animals started to die of thirst and hunger. Famine prevailed, and those able to leave for better lands did just that. But unfortunately, he was forced to go to his enemies' lands because they were fertile, so he disguised himself and pretended to be stupid. He changed his name to Hubla, which means imbecile, and his camel's name similar. He approached the tribe's sheik for a job and was made to collect wood and do other mundane tasks. He erected a tent at the edge of the village and lived among the tribe without anyone suspecting his true identity. Soon, enemies attacked the tribe and stole some of their camels and sheep, so the tribe recruited its finest men to fight back. He begged from the sheik to let him go with the men, and he finally agreed to let him help out with caring for the injured. When war broke out between the two tribes, he was at the front line. He fought the enemies and caused them to retreat. The tribe was amazed at his skill and strength. When they distributed the booty, they gave him an equal share of everything, including sugar, coffee, flour, and rice. Day after day passed, and the tribe's rations were depleted rapidly. He was one of the few who had saved some rations, and although not originally from the same tribe, he proved to be very generous, helping the poor to survive. One fine evening, the sheik visited him in his tent for the first time. After exchanging traditional pleasantries, the sheik asked him to tell where he had come from and what his real name was. In the beginning, he tried to be evasive and denied that he had any other name, but the sheik demanded to know the truth. After much persuasion, he told the sheik, but if only the sheik guaranteed his safety. Okay, so eventually he was confronted. exploring of the difference between reality and illusion is further complicated by jewels, gifts, and magical objects, other magical objects like mirrors, combs, and the ubiquitous gold ring, which I will read about. This is called the magic ring, and it shows up in more than one folklore book. One day a man uttered the magic words, Salim bin Salim Salam. So the rocks parted and he went inside. However, he got lost in the beautiful paradise, and frightened, he wandered about aimlessly for some time until he met another man. The man had a magic ring that he said would guide the lost man out. The man lent the ring to the lost man and told him he must promise to leave it at the exit as he left. The lost man agreed, but when he examined the ring, he realized it was both beautiful and valuable. He decided to keep it. With the help of the ring, he found the exit, but as he climbed through, the rocks closed tightly around him. He was trapped there until the owner of the ring appeared and reminded him of the promise. The lost man said he was sorry and assured the owner of the ring he had indeed learned a lesson. With that, the rocks parted and he was released. Okay. Okay, so I already mentioned that Indian folk tales have animals that are more likely to be main characters. Also, there's some difference and also similarity between the kinds of animals that appear in Indian folk tales versus Omani folk tales. So, for example, like in Omani folk tales, in Indian folk tales, the camel is present, the donkey is present, and a bird would be present. However, a monkey would appear in Indian folk tales, but not in Omani folk tales typically. And Indian folk tales also will mention horses and sheep. Okay. However, like Omani folk tales might mention the Rig Vedas or Hinduism, sometimes Indian folk tales will mention the Quran. Okay, so I have some Indian folk tales with me today as well. Here's one. This is called True Valence. Once Emperor Shivaji was awaiting the return of his prime minister in the tent. All of a sudden, Prime Minister Madhav came near Shivaji with a scripture in his hands. A dholi was brought before him. Dholi was a name denoted to a traditional method of taking brides to the destination of their grooms by carrying them in room-like structures made up of wood. The prime minister gladly gave the news that the Mughal army had been defeated and that the king had run away to save his life. Afterwards, Shivaji pointed towards the dholi and asked, "What is this?" The prime minister said that there was a beautiful damsel, Begum, who had been brought as an award for the victor in the army. The prime minister was ignorant. He further added that he had also brought Billal's religious scripture Quran. Both of these should be insulted to take revenge from Billal. Shivaji was a noble-hearted king. He embraced the religious book Quran with great regard and told Billal's wife to come outside from the dholi. After watching Begum, he said, "You indeed are very beautiful. I wish that I would have taken birth as your son. Then I would have been exceptionally fair and handsome." Then Shivaji gazed at his prime minister and chided him, saying, "This is not valence, that you should attack the women and rape them. It is wrong to insult the religious scriptures. It is a cowardly act to insult the religious scriptures of other communities. A valiant scholar and soldier never insults any woman or religious scripture." At the same time, he commanded his officer to return to the holy book Quran Sharif and the Begum back to King Billal Khan. He commanded, and this was immediately implemented. After getting his Quran Sharif and queen back, King Billal bowed before Shivaji's valiance from the core of his heart and offered him salutations from his soul and mind. Okay. Also, in terms of trying to compare or examine Omani folk tales in relation to European ones, Brothers Grimm folk tales, which are, I believe, are European, do sometimes focus disabled characters, according to some recent scholarship, which I'll reference later in this presentation. In Brothers Grimm's, the handicapped or disabled characters tend to be other or viewed or portrayed as passive. But in Omani folktales, there are actually agents in the story that can surpass or overcome their disabilities. Okay, so actually I have a really good example of that, and I will read that. Actually, I'll read a small bit of it. So I've heard this one before. This is newly written. I happen to be partially Omani. One of my grandparents was Omani ethnically, and I heard this tale when I was a child. And to read these folk tales is very different than hearing them when you're growing up. So when I heard this tale when I grew up, the line that I'm going to leave off was really sort of a punchline. It's really a comedy. So I hope you'll see my point. Okay, this is called The Lying Blind Man. On their way, the trip became very long. The couple amused themselves by chatting and singing songs. As they continued along the path, they came upon a blind man walking alone, finding his way by tapping the path with his cane. Saad's wife felt sorry for the blind man and asked her husband to help him. To this, her husband replied, "How can I help him? Let him ride the donkey, and I'll walk with you." To which Saad said, "But he is a stranger. Let him be, woman." His wife responded, "Please help him. My conscience won't rest unless you call him over and offer him our donkey to ride. He's a blind man and can't walk alone for so long." At last, Saad agreed and approached the blind man, offering him their donkey to ride. The blind man was pleased and thanked him for their help. And so the blind man climbed up and rode the donkey as Saad and his wife walked in front of him. As they walked, Saad asked him, "Where do you want us to take you?" The blind man replied, "When you pass a group of men, let me off there." So they kept walking on the dirt road, flanked by palm trees, and when they saw a group of men sitting by the mosque, they stopped. Saad helped the blind man off the donkey. Suddenly the blind man shouted from the top of his lungs, "Help me, everyone! This man stole my wife and my donkey." Okay. All right. So it's kind of like a joke. So someone was telling you that, and they stopped there, you would have to wonder if the blind man ends up getting the privilege of the donkey and the wife permanently. Okay. Okay, so there's this issue of are disabled people visible in folktales, and they're very visible in Omani folktales. I happen to have this article. The print's really tiny, but I will pass it around. That suggests that Omani folktales are very unique in that there is a very evident focus on disabled characters, especially disabled children who overcome their handicaps. Okay, women. I think women's role in Omani folktales is very interesting. They too are often main characters. However, women seem to be portrayed differently than men. I think when women are in a coupling, in a marriage with men, they're portrayed as equals. But sometimes women are portrayed as liminal and sort of otherworldly, more so than men in these folktales. So an example would be titles like The Girl Who Was Dead, a very creepy story, The Invisible Woman, and The Genie Bride. Okay, and I'd like to read them all to you, but we don't have time. What I will read to you is one of them. Okay. This is from Halima and the Snake. Okay, so this is called The Girl Who Was Dead. This is sort of like a horror movie. Around midnight, Jamila woke up. She was about to scream when she heard a faint voice. It seemed to get louder and louder. Then the box was ripped open. She felt a hand lift her up and remove the cloth, her burial cloth. Then it was the old man with the piercing eyes, but she saw the mercury in her hand, and the man fled into darkness. Jamila spent the night in her open grave, too scared to find her way home. At sunrise, a herd of dusty sheep ran in to trample her grave. A man on a donkey looked down at her and mumbled something she couldn't hear. When Jamila didn't reply, he got off and began scolding her. "What are you doing in the cemetery? Don't you know there are hyenas around? They could have eaten you." Jamila's throat was dry from the dust. "Well, since you can't tell me who you are," the shepherd said, "I will take you home with me." So he picked Jamila up and slung her on the donkey's back like a sack of onions. At last I am saved from that evil man, Jamila thought. But the shepherd and his family were wicked and treated her like a slave. Hope vanished with each passing day. Jamila grew up and forgot much of her past life. Okay. So usually when men travel or go elsewhere and live different lives, they are, for example, seen as being intentionally evasive or you know, more so having an intention. Okay. So just to review some of the classic concepts that I used from this, the work of George Simmel. He was a classical, long-deceased sociologist. He had the concepts social statics and social dynamics. There's really no particular, it's hard, much of his work is not translated from original German, so I don't have a particular title of his to recommend to you, but you know, you'll probably find a secondary source. The work of Emile Durkheim in terms of distinguishing between the sacred and profane, although you could probably find anthropological antecedents that suggest that there is this distinction that arises in every culture, distinguishing the sacred from the profane. The source I would suggest is a book called The Elementary Forms of Religious Life that outline this difference and gives, you know, fully fleshed out examples. Okay, some of the references that I used are actually up here. You know, we're going to wrap up in a little bit and have time for questions, but I do have some sources. This is actually something from the Wayne State, I think this is from the Wayne State University Press. It's a journal about folktales. And there's a book review about the book titled Disability, Deformity, and Disease in the Grimm Fairy Tales, written, well, it's actually published by Wayne State University Press. I'll have it dog-eared and put over here so you can take a look at it. But the three actual sources I used of Omani folktales are here, as well as the Indian folktale book. But here they are listed. So there's something that came out in 2008 called Omani Folktales. The majority of the folktales I read to you today are from this book. And then there's Lima and the Snake. It looks like this. Set up like a children's book, but also very fascinating. And then finally, and I'll tell you how you can try, these books actually were available free from an Omani Institute in DC. This is called My Grandmother's Stories, Folktales from Dhofar. And that came out in 2012. And this book about Grimm's fairy tales came out in 2014. So there's a lot of new work in this area. For further reading about Oman, I didn't get to talk a lot about Oman because we had a real focus today, but Warlords of Oman, written in 1967. The Russians tried to invade and influence Oman unduly, and this happened in the 60s and 70s, and it was written about. So if you're interested in the history of that, even the Russians were there at some point. And this is why the English remain in Oman, because Omanis didn't want to join the Soviet Union. Okay. Also, a book called In Service of the Sultan, a first-hand account of the Dhofar insurgency. This came out in 2007. My favorite book, I passed it around, it's over there, The Food of Oman. Fantastic, it's amazing. And finally, if you're interested in what it would be like to travel to Oman, I recommend The Rough Guide to Oman. Okay, and that's that's made by the British. I recommend those books. Okay, if you're interested in trying to get a copy of this book, they were widely available. It was actually something that was in the making when I was in Oman. So, by the time I got back to the States, I think it was out. But there is something called the Sultan Qaboos. Qaboos is the last name of the royal family in Oman Cultural Center. It is in DC. Okay, so the U.S. and Oman have positive relations, although the Omanis are closer to the British. And you can email them at info@sqcc.org. You can also go to the website. You can just probably look up, Oman in DC or Sultan Qaboos or Omani Cultural Center, but at www.sqcc.org. I'll give you some time to write that down. I don't think it's available commercially. Everything else I use, well, actually, the Omani folktale sources, all three of them, actually two of them rather, are available commercially. These two, you can get them on Amazon. Halima and the Snake is easier to get too. You can always go to Amazon UK to order it. I do that sometimes. They're actually sometimes cheaper from the British. I recently ordered a book on Amazon. It was something that was going for about $50 on our Amazon. I got it for maybe like $13 from the British. So the British are better about keeping books. This one has been hard to find, but you can still get it on Amazon. I think it's out of print. But I don't think My Grandmother's Stories is available commercially yet or at all. So, and you might still be able to get it for free. I got one copy for free. Okay. Finally, if you want to make halwa, it's one of my favorite desserts. You can try to find it in the book if you want to see what it looks like. But here are instructions on how to make it. It's a dessert that Omanis always make if someone's getting married. Marriage is a big thing in Omani culture. Couples are very close. Divorce is rare. It does happen. I was talking to John about one of my students who had quite a lively social life. Her parents were unfortunately divorced. Her mother was Mexican. But anyway, usually Omanis don't get divorced. All right, so I think I'm finished. And let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to answer them. I was only there an academic year, but I'll try to answer questions if you have them. Thank you. Yes?
My question is, when were these stories usually told? Were they, so a lot of these were told for, the last one you read, when you talked about rape, I'm thinking it's probably for a fairly adult audience or adult entertainment, but.
That was Indian.
Yeah, that was kind of rather shocking, but it was also kind of surprising in some way. So my question is, when are these stories, and then you compare them to European, like Brothers Grimm, and Hans Christian Andersen, where you got a lot of, people coming out of ovens and all sorts of other stuff. And here was magic and the mystical elements. So what are these stories read, and who generally tends to read them? And what is
Traditionally, they're told by an elder. Okay, so it would be like, in a home space, maybe where you eat with your family, families gather. In the United States, I was told by an elder the story about the blind man who claims a stranger's donkey and wife as his own. That was told to me at the dinner table. And that's similar, to life in Oman. Like, you might have a rug or cushions that you sit on, but the family eating space or the family gathering space, Oman's actually very, very hot. When I was there, it was usually at least 90 degrees. And so often in the evening, it cools down, and Omani might cook food on the roof or out in the sand outside, or in a community space where everyone gathers to watch television outside. So it might be told outside, to you as a child. So traditionally it is an elder, whether it's a distant relative who's older, uncle or aunt, or grandparent or parent, to children, so that children know what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and that they gain an appreciation for the wisdom the elder has. So even for me in the U.S., I was told by an elder from Oman the story about the blind man. Yes?
So in a way, the Omani folktales, they I don't know how to they help the children with their values or stuff like that, or in their beliefs in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in these folktales we learn how we may not treat outsiders, when to know when we should stay away from some outsiders. Okay, so, you know, I am partially Omani, I was raised Catholic, but, you know, most people who are of Omani descent are raised Islamic, so you may not be able to trust someone who's Portuguese, for example, right? So it lets you know where there are boundaries. However, without shaking up the reverence and faith in the divine and the miraculous, you know, understand that you can overcome those boundaries in ways that are good and in some ways that are not so good. Yes.
So I'm more familiar with like Arabian tales.
Okay.
So I was just wondering, like, do any of like Omani folk tales like overlap with the Arabian ones? Are there any stories that are like the same? Because I know for sure that
Mhm.
like a lot of like Indian folk tale stories, they like a lot of them are the same as Arabian ones. So I was wondering if there are any the same with you know?
Well, you know, it's a good question, and I think if I can try to get out of this, and well, I was going to go online. There is a book. Actually, maybe I can try to go online for a moment. There is a book that's out that focuses on Arabic folk tales, you know, including Saudi folk tales. And if I can get this going, I'll show you. But I'm going to tell you basically I don't know. I would think, you know, because I only focus on Omani folk tales, I would think that there are similarities simply because boundaries change. Okay, so that disturbance in Yemen when I was in Oman was about the boundary. Okay, so ultimately I don't think the boundary changed, but it shifts. Okay, and you know, which is why the British remain in Oman, because you know they didn't want the Russians to affect that. But I would guess that you would find similarities in some Saudi folktales and Yemeni folktales, just because the geography is something that you know, the political geography shifts, but also because although you wouldn't normally want your daughter to marry a Portuguese man, right? You would possibly, this is not the one I'm talking about, but this is an example of something, Arab folktales that you could look at. There's also another one with an orange cover I might try to find. But is not so bizarre for an Omani girl to maybe marry a Saudi or someone from Yemen. So you know, historically there is that intermingling. So inevitably, you know, my answer to your question is yes. However, I don't have any concrete examples to draw upon because I've only focused on Omani.
Yeah, because like a lot of the themes you were saying were like familiar to me, because when I took a class about literature of the non-Western world and we focused on Arabian folktales, like basically all the themes that you said were the same exact, but then every story that you mentioned I had like never heard of, so that's why I was wondering maybe like some of the stories overlap or maybe not, or maybe it's just similar themes.
Well, I think it would be logical for us to conclude that they do. But you know, I don't want to say yes, you know, absolutely, because I don't know. I mean, this is what I was talking about. You know, my opinion is that Omani folk tales are unique. However, you know, this issue of you know, looking at the Middle East, and the Middle East is extremely diverse. It's much more diverse than I think that many Americans understand. But you know, in terms of things that are coming from the Arabian Peninsula, like Oman, Yemen, Saudi, the Emirates, Bahrain, probably there would have to be, right? There is this book. I would recommend that you take a look at this book, you know, maybe check it out of the library, or get it on Melcat if you need to, Folk Tales from the Arabian Peninsula. And it tells us that, it looks at Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, and Yemen, and Bahrain. So I would take a look at that. You'd probably find most similarities within the Arabian Peninsula, you know, as opposed to like, you know, drawing from Morocco or Iran or Turkey, right? Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening to me. I am pleased that I had interested, you know, observers today. Thank you very much.